Hi guys, this is Isha from the Observational Astrologer. I'm back with another reading. I thought I would take a look at the chart of Johnny Depp, the American movie star who's had a long and very illustrious career, and more recently he's been in all kinds of legal issues and trouble, including the very, very public divorce he had with Amber Heard. So I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at his chart and see if we can find any confluence with from his personal life circumstances, with his birth chart, and the dashas that he has been going through. So, without further ado, I will share screen. We can begin. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the chart of Johnny Depp. He was born 9th of June 1963, 8:44 a.m. in Owensboro, Kentucky, in the US. So that makes him a Cancer Lagna. He was born at 19 degrees 5 minutes off the nakshatra of Ashlesha, which is the nakshatra of the divine serpents. And we see that the Lagna Lord has gone into the sixth house. Lagna Lord for Cancer Lagna is Moon. Moon has gone into the sixth house in Purva Shada, conjunct Ketu. So this is very interesting. What does this tell us? So Sixth house is the house of debt, disease, enemies, prarabdha karma, seva, and court cases. Moon is also conjunct Ketu, which is in Purvashada. Sorry, its Moon is in Purvashada, while Ketu is in Uttarashada. Purvashada is a war nakshatra. This is the birth star of the planet Mars. It's also connected to strategy and strategic thinking. So we know for a fact that Johnny Depp has had multiple legal issues in his life, including the very, very public divorce that he had with Amber Heard. We see the dispositor of this Moon Ketu conjunction, which is Jupiter. It's very strong in its own sign in Pisces. It's the ninth lord of Bhagya in its own house, and it has Griha Drishti on the sixth house, which is very good. So it's providing protection, but it is showing me that the life purpose and that the key themes in life are moving towards the sixth house. Another thing we know about Johnny Depp is that he does a lot of charity work. He is affiliated with lots of different charities, particularly to do with kids, and he gives a lot to charitable causes. So again, that's a very sixth house theme. Then we see that he has a Venus Mercury Sun conjunction in the 11th house in the sign of Taurus. Now, Venus Mercury are in Kritika, and Venus is literally at the exaltation point of Moon, making it very, very strong. And neither planet is combust, which is rare given that it's in the same Rashi as the Sun. Most of the times when these planets get too close to the Sun, they get combust or burnt and they lose their capacity. But in his case, the Sun is very much on the border. It's almost moving into Gemini. So neither planet is conjunct and the Sun is in Mriksara. Taurus is also his Arudha Lagna, or his image in the world. So, how do people know him? We see him as a creative person because of the Mercury Venus conjunction. These are two Rajas planets. They represent skill, beauty, art. And Sun's presence can also show a link to music. So, Johnny Depp, besides his acting career, we know that he's been a musician in the past and he's also been a fine artist. In fact, I think he donated the proceeds from the sale of some of his paintings to children's causes and children's hospitals in the past. Next, we see he has Yogakaraka Mars, which is the best planet for a Cancer Lagna, in the second house in Magha, creating a Singhasan Yoga. Singhasan means a throne. It literally means he is seated upon a throne. This is very apt. I mean, he's won numerous accolades and awards throughout his life. And I think we saw something very similar in another chart that I did recently. It will come to me. Can't remember the name. Finally, we see that he has Saturn in Capricorn in its own sign, because Capricorn is a sign ruled by Saturn, in the seventh house. This is very powerful because Saturn not only has Dikbala, which is directional strength, but it's also in a Shasha Mahapurush Yoga because it's in a Kendra from the Lagna. Saturn is also Atmakaraka for him, planet with the highest degree, which represents some level of soul strength and sort of specific Saturnian quality in him, which could be that he is a bit judgmental by nature, he's quick to judge, he's hardworking, maybe a little bit unforgiving, etc. Another Mahapurush yoga he has, if you look from the moon, he's got Jupiter in the fourth house in its own sign. That creates a Hamsa Mahapurush yoga. Now, two excellent Mahapurush yogas, but a word of caution here, because while Mahapurush yogas can show extraordinary characteristics of a person, um, these yogas alone cannot be used to judge a person as being all good or all bad. Now, having the mere presence of a Mahapurush yoga will show that that planet has very high ideals, but also exalted and strong planets will demand a lot of sacrifice from a person, and they aren't always easy to handle. A good example of someone who is very obviously seen as negative in the world, who had a lot of Mahapurush yogas, was Adolf Hitler. Um, he's famous. He's famous for a lot of very negative things, but he did have Mahapurush yogas. So there's no. It's a good idea to not get carried away when you see Mahapurush yogas in a chart, but it does tell me something extraordinary about him. Now, there are a lot of things we can go into in this chart. It's a very interesting chart, but let's just look at time period wise because we'll talk a bit about the legal hassles and the issues he's had. Now, I would say, looking at reading his Wikipedia page and other pages online, the best period in his life was from 1994 to 2012. This is when he achieved strong critical acclaim, box office success, and his personal life was stable. And this was when he ran his Rahu Dasha, which you might argue could be negative for Cancer Lagna. I mean, Rahu is a node of the moon. It eclipses the sun and the moon. But we see for Johnny Depp, he's got his Rahu in Gemini, which is a very strong placement from Rahu, and it's in the seventh from the moon. Now, the seventh house is 10th from the 10th house, which shows gain in position of Pada Prapti, which is exactly what happened in his Rahu Dasha. Additionally, if we look at his Navamsha chart, we see that Rahu Ketu are Vargottama, which means that these planets remain in the same Rashi in D9 Navamsha chart, giving them more strength. And yes, you can argue that is that good for a Cancer Lagna person? But there's no doubt that it was good for him materially. From the Lagna, that Rahu is in the 12th house. So it is giving him an inclination towards drinking, substance abuse, anger, incarceration, multiple relationships. Now, I don't think he was incarcerated for a long time, but he definitely had multiple run-ins with the law. That definitely happened. Then we see the dispositive Rahu, which is Mercury, is strongly placed with Venus. But that Sun Mercury Venus conjunction in the 11th house is getting a Graha Drishti from Saturn, which is the eighth lord for a Cancer Lagna, the worst planet. So there are problems there. Next, we see from 2016 to 2021, 2022, that's when he had a host of legal issues, court cases, multiple, sorry, a bitter public divorce, and worst of all, for a public figure, his image took a really big hit. And you know, erstwhile he had been known as this very successful movie star. He People started to think negatively about him. They thought he was a wife beater, and there were all kinds of issues surrounding the Amber Heard court case and the defamation court cases that both of them filed against each other at one point. Um, so we see that he was actually running his Jupiter Dasha at this time. Now, Jupiter is his ninth lord in the ninth house of Bhagya, but it's also the sixth lord of enemies, court cases, fights, health issues, and it's looking at that sixth house. So while it is providing protection, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it, you cannot suppress that sixth house. If Jupiter is going to bring about ninth house and Bhagya issues, it will bring out issues relating to that sixth house. And that's exactly what happened to him. Uh, if we look at it from a transit perspective, and let me just open it during using animated transits, and we go back to 2015, 2016. Sorry. Right. So you literally see, you can look at the late date here, May 15, and I'm just going to jump years to 2021, 2022. He ran his Sade Sati. So you see the Saturn has moved from the house before the moon onto the moon, then the house after the moon. And concurrently at this time, in 2021, let's just go back a year, we see Rahu was also transiting the sign of Taurus, where his Arudha Lagna is placed. So Rahu was effectively spoiling his Arudha Lagna. So while on the surface, he was running his Jupiter Dasha, which is very strongly placed, he went through multiple court cases, his image was tarnished, and Jupiter Dasha didn't give him everything that it was supposed to give. Now, one reason for this you can see if we look at his Navamsha chart just over here, you see he's a Sagittarius or a Dhanu Lagna person in D9, and that Jupiter has gone into the second house of income and wealth. It's conjunct Mercury and Venus again, very interesting. But it is debilitated because Jupiter debilitates in Capricorn. So while Jupiter is in strength, it's very strong in the birth chart. In Navamsha, Jupiter actually loses strength. So Jupiter Dasha, from that perspective, will not give him everything, will not give him all the protection that the birth chart is claiming that it will. Now, I mean, there's lots of things we can see in this chart. Another thing we can see is, I mean, transits and dashas aside, we also see that from the moon lagna. So if we just make moon the lagna, we see that Venus has gone into the sixth house. This is really not very good from a relationship perspective because Venus has gone into the house of celibacy. Sixth house is also the house of celibacy. And Venus, if it represents your spouse, particularly for a man, it's again and again pointing towards a need for a person to be celibate. And we know that Johnny Depp, especially now, if you look at his life over time, is is a monogamous person. He doesn't, sorry, not monogamous. He's single. He hasn't been in long-term relationships, marriages. He was married before, but all the marriages he had previously all ended in failure. They didn't work out, which is unfortunate. But it's hard for a person to reconcile with the fact that they have sixth house Venus. This Venus is asking them to be celibate, but actually, and going towards Venusian things like marriage, like relationships, is unfortunately always going to end in disaster because Venus, in its highest quality, asks for you to sacrifice 12th from it. So 12th from that Venus we see is the fifth house. Fifth house is what is really dear to you. It's your creation, it's your children. So, and I don't know the specifics for him particularly, but every time he would have entered into a relationship, he would have had to sacrifice something that is very, very dear to him, which unfortunately led to the collapse of his relationships. So that is the chart of Johnny Depp. We know that in he still has a few years to go for his Jupiter Dasha, but in 2029 he starts Saturn. And Saturn from we if we go from the ascendant, if I repeat myself, very strongly placed in its own sign. It's in directional strength, and even in Navamsha chart, although it's not in its own sign, it's in the 10th house, which if you think about from a Kalpurush perspective, is Saturn's own sign. If you think of Aries Lagna, the 10th house becomes the sign of Capricorn. So I definitely see him recovering in his Saturn Dasha and his career. And because Saturn again is Atmakaraka for him, Saturn becoming a lot better, stronger, taking him to new heights when he enters his Saturn Dasha. So that's all for today. That was a really quick look at the chart of Johnny Depp. And join me soon when we look at other celebrity charts. Thank you.